Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 203, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Friday, December 15th, 2023. Yes, the weekend is here. Very excited. I'm sure many of you are as well. Hope you have all sorts of fun, and maybe if you just need to relax, that's fine too. Whatever you choose to do this weekend, I hope it's enjoyable. You stay safe, you stay warm in case this chilly weather, continues. Although, it's not too bad during the day, but can get pretty cold once the sun goes down or before the sun comes up, depending on if you're up that early or not. Yes, looking forward to the weekend. I don't think I have any plans. No, nothing going on this weekend, but, just nice to have the time to potentially go out and do something fun. And if you need plans, go to holycitycenter.com. You can see what events are going on this weekend. Nothing else really to talk about, so we're going to dive into the latest headlines. At the next Charleston City Council meeting, which, by the way, will be held on December 19th, Mayor John Tecklenburg will introduce a resolution that is supported by 4 statewide organizations. This new resolution calls on the South Carolina legislature to pass a bill that would permit South Carolina municipalities to adopt an election process for local offices called instant runoff voting. You may have heard of this before. So specifically here in South Carolina, there is a bipartisan House bill, number 4022, that is currently in the House Judiciary Committee. This bill, if passed, would allow municipalities to use instant runoff voting as one of 4 election methods currently available. We'll get into the details of how that would work and what instant runoff voting actually means. So yes, although Mayor Tecklenburg will introduce this resolution and is getting support from some organizations, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. I mean, it's because in the sense of that it still would have to be passed by the legislature in Columbia. So no matter how badly and how much support he has in the city of Charleston, it doesn't mean this is going to happen. So just keep that in mind as well. But it is a way for someone and people around government who say, hey, this could potentially be a money saver, number one. And number two, may make people happier with the voting process. So number one, this would prevent when there is a runoff, you having to go back and vote. We already know it's hard enough to get people to vote once, but then you tell them, hey, there wasn't a winner in this race. No one got over 50%, so we got to do it again, is not always received well, of course. But it also costs money, which, I don't think, myself included, people really think about. So, for instance, the recent mayoral election runoff that happened in Charleston between incumbent John Tecklenburg and now the mayor-elect William Cogswell cost city taxpayers about $200,000. If instant runoff voting was in place, no runoff would have been needed, and that money could have been used for something else. Meanwhile, in the North Charleston City Council election, that resulted in 5 candidates winning their district with fewer than 50% of the vote. So that's another issue. We also talked about this with the school board and why, some of these Moms for Liberty candidates who won their district, they didn't get 50% of the vote. And because there's no runoff, they get in there despite the vast majority of the people not in their districts not voting for them. So instant runoff voting would help out in numerous facets. So it's a pretty simple election system change as well. It's already being used by over 50 cities, counties, and states across the country. And that ended up, of course, saving them the money and effort, while also making sure a consensus is reached with whatever election is going on in those areas. So here's how instant runoff voting works. Voters would rank as many candidates as they want on their particular ballot in the order of preference. All first choices are tallied, and if a candidate receives more than half of the first choices, that candidate wins, just like any other election. So if someone gets, the top vote, this is my number one choice for whatever election, they get over 50% of those top votes, just like they would have anyway, they win that election. However, if there is no majority winner, after counting those first choices, the race will then be moved to what's called this instant runoff. The candidate who has the fewest first choice votes is eliminated. So whoever that person is, they're out. And voters who pick that candidate as their top choice will have their next choice counted instead. The process continues until there is a candidate winning a majority of the votes. So pretty simple process. with it, you might have heard it's like ranked choice voting is this another term you might have heard out there that's similar to this. And again, this would just prevent the whole runoff process that we have currently of returning, what is it, a week, 2 weeks later, however long it is. It's more than a week, but returning to vote again, having to go through that whole process, just prevents that. That means you'll need less volunteers to come back because you won't have any runoff elections. You'll save money because you don't have to pay for those election, because there are election workers, of course, and there are costs associated with all of this, even if you have volunteers. So seems good to me. I don't currently, based on this explanation and other versions of this I've read about, I don't see a downside to this. It just seems to make the most sense. Again, not just financially, but also it just saves a lot of time and effort. People are sick of politics, especially this, 24 hours. It seems like, with all the news channels, something's always going on in politics, whatever the news cycle is. And on top of that, you're inundated with people's opinions and things online. Like, the less politics, the better in some instances. And instead of having to go through another few weeks or whatever of political ads and attacks and endorsements and all the other nonsense, we can just eliminate that. Hey, today's the day you vote. We are going to have a winner. Maybe not today if it's close and we have to move to this instant runoff. It takes some more tallying and things, but we will have a winner from this. You are not going to have to come back to vote. That just really helps out everyone. So fully support it. Hopefully, again, although this is, really, this resolution really won't necessarily move the needle. It could, as far as influencing the people in Columbia to ultimately pass this. But it's a good first step, to show that there's support for this within the community. So CARTA and representatives of the Coastal Carolina Fair are kind of butting heads right now about a possible park and ride facility that is being planned for the fairgrounds. So representatives of the Coastal Carolina Fair, of course, I'm sure you're all familiar, held out in Latson on the fairgrounds, are voicing their concerns about CARTA's plan to build this park and ride facility at the fairgrounds. For those who don't remember, CARTA stands for Charleston Area Regional Transportation Authority. They are the buses you see around town. That's the main thing you would probably know them for. So this park and ride facility was part of CARTA's Low Country Rapid Transit Plan, which is the first ever large-scale transportation project that has been put forth in this region. We had CARTA Chairman Mike Seekings on the podcast several times since I started it. It's been a little bit, but he has talked about these things previously if you want to go listen back, although some of the information is outdated. The bigger scope and plan is still the same. So according to Seekings, he says that the $600 million plan is a result of over a decade of regional planning. And so there shouldn't have really been any surprises in regards to this park and ride facility. If the plans go through, the facility will take up about 6 acres of the 180 acres that are available for parking on the fairgrounds. So for those who, don't want to do the math, and hey, I don't blame you, that means they'll go down to 174 acres of parking. That 6 that was taken away will be specifically for this park and ride facility. Now, Mike Jernigan, who is a member of the Exchange Board as well as the former president of the Coastal Carolina Fair, says that their initial discussions with CARTA were about leasing an acre to an acre and a half of land for a bus stop, not the 6 acres that it currently is. And he said that CARTA wanted more land to either purchase or take by eminent domain, but they had agreed on an acre to an acre and a half. Now, Chairman Mike Seekings said he was surprised by this response, and when he was talking to Live 5 News about this story, he said that when he spoke with leadership of the fairgrounds early in the process, they had many, they had that, of course, and then they had many conversations over the years about this area of land, and he seemed to be kind of surprised that they were taking exception to this and didn't understand where the miscommunication was. Now, officials with the Coastal Carolina Fair outside of Jernigan say that their issue is not the size of the facility, though, but the actual location of those 6 acres. So the park and ride facility would be located in Lot 2A of the fairgrounds, which is adjacent to Highway 78 and Gate 2, which is one of the major entrances of the fairgrounds. So Jernigan echoed this, saying that he felt that, along with other officials for the fair, that supporting public transportation, of course, is a good thing, and that they're not opposed to that in general in any way. They just felt like the location that was chosen is the wrong spot. They feel that there are better options available adjacent to the property or even on a different place within the property, but they just don't want their what they called their prime parking spot to be taken. Jernigan went on to say that the Coastal Carolina Fair believes the location of the facility would disrupt patrons' ability to enter and exit the fair, hurt fair revenue generation, and impact the future success of the fair, as well as their ability to support their community partners. The fair donates a lot of money to local organizations, so obviously the less money they pull in, the less they're able to put towards those. To those partners. Now, Sea Kings responded again for the story, saying that CARTA wants to make the plan work for everybody and enhance the experience for the community. But at this point, it's unlikely that much is going to change because this process has been in the works for years, and they're just so far along. He says, though, that CARTA does want to implement the plan cooperatively and fairly, and believes there's just some sort of misunderstanding here. So we'll see if they can work out these differences or how exactly this will all play out. But ultimately, if the plans do go through, construction is expected to start in 2026 and be completed by 2029. So whatever decision they come to, it's still going to be several years before this park and ride facility is available to use. And it seems like whenever it goes into effect, will take about 3 years to finish. So that'll certainly cause a disruption. But again, we'll see if they decide on a different location or what changes are made. I think it's good that both parties want a public transportation option. A lot of people complain that there's not enough in this area or it doesn't go to enough locations. And I think this would be a benefit, ultimately. And we'll see where it does end up in the future. Well, Colleton County and the Murdoch trials, there's so many, it just doesn't stop. And now this kind of side controversy involving wiretapping and a corruption probe is just getting messier and messier. So state investigators have found evidence linking a Colleton County government wiretapping scandal to a public ethics complaint against the county's elected clerk of court. Becky Hill is that county clerk of court. Now, quick refresher. She, as I said, is the clerk of court in Colleton County. There's a lot of C's, and she was there during the Murdoch murder trial. There's since been an ethics complaint saying that she influenced the jury, made inappropriate comments about the trial to them, and then ultimately used her position to make money by releasing a book about the trial. Now, that part we all know is true. There is a book out there, and there may have been. It's not wrong that she wrote the book, but some of the accusations are she used her position in an inappropriate way to maybe help out, get information or to influence. They claim to maybe influence the trial in a way that made her book better. We'll see what comes out of that. So that's that scandal. You remember that. Murdoch's lawyers are trying to spin that into getting a retrial done. We'll see what goes on there. Now, if you don't remember, the Colleton County the other employee who's facing these wiretapping allegations is her son. And for a while, there really weren't any details about the wiretapping. But now a source has told ABC News 4 that the two cases are in fact related, which just makes this even messier. So this source is unnamed, but ABC News 4 described them as someone with direct knowledge of the ongoing public corruption probe. But they just were unable to give their name because of the current ongoing investigation. We'll talk about that more in a little bit. So Becky Hill's son is Jeff Hill. He's 34 years old and was the director of technology for Colleton County for their government. Back on November 21st, he was charged by state police with a single count of illegal wiretapping. We talked about this on the podcast. He was briefly jailed and then ultimately fired by the county the following day. Now, that source with knowledge of the timeline and facts leading up to Jeff Hill's arrest and then his ultimate firing, told ABC News 4 that Hill used administrative control over Colleton County's internal communication systems to illegally monitor both calls and emails of other county employees. Now, the source, as I mentioned, their identity is being withheld because they were not authorized to speak about the facts of an open investigation. So, they're trying to get information to the public, but don't themselves want to get in trouble, of course. Now, a subsequent state police inquest into Jeff Hill's actions produced evidence of a plot to spy on internal county discussions, most notably conversations about a formal ethics complaint filed against Hill's mother, as I mentioned, Becky Hill. So it's directly related. In some capacity, he was spying on people, trying to get information about his mom and for his mom. That source also told News 4 that investigators ultimately found evidence that Jeff Hill was relaying details of these illegally intercepted phone and email conversations back to his mother. And so that just adds this another layer to it. None of the details that were shared with ABC News 4, by the way, specifically about Jeff Hill's firing were actually publicly disclosed when he appeared in court for a bond hearing on November 22nd, which was the day after his arrest. So this is all new information, but it is not officially public, and it's coming from this source. So I trust the reporting from ABC News 4. I know and have known people who have worked for them. And I believe that although the source is unnamed, I'm sure they vetted this person and have what they needed to go to press with this information. But if you're looking for public records, it hasn't been released yet. And these aren't, as big as that is, that's not the only details that they got from this source. Some additional details and background on Hill's action are also outlined in a suspension letter and then a subsequent termination letter that was sent to him by Colleton County Administrator Kevin Griffin. Now, copies of both of those letters were obtained by ABC News 4 through a standard public records request. We've talked about the FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, things like that. So they were able to get the suspension letters and then the termination letter that shed some more light on what happened. So according to those letters, Hill was initially suspended for 18 days, effective on July 27th, after internal discovery came out that he had wiretapped the phone calls of his supervisor. The suspension and termination letters in that personnel file did not shed light on what, if any, justification Hill tried to provide his bosses when confronted with their allegations. County officials do, however, cite numerous violations of county policy as cause for suspending and later firing Hill. Most notably, in those termination letters, Griffin wrote that some of the policy violations included sexual and other forms of illegal harassment. Now, despite that being in the letter, Griffin doesn't actually go into any additional details about the harassment in the letter. So we don't really know what that is related to or what the accusation is. If there is any supportive documents, or recordings or anything about what may have happened, we don't know. What we do know is that for whatever reason, in addition to the wiretapping allegations, apparently there was some sort of sexual and other illegal harassment that ultimately led to his suspension. So that adds yet another layer to this story. And I encourage you to visit the link in the show notes because it's a pretty long post from ABC News 4. They dive into the timeline even more. And they also bring up a good point, which was that, he was suspended for these different things, but these are pretty serious allegations. And yes, of course, there's a process to these things, but there was no intention on terminating his employment despite the allegations, that they initially had. So it's just interesting to see, like, okay, so what made them ultimately decide, what information came out that they said, okay, this is a bridge too far. Just for a little bit of housekeeping, no date for the Murdaugh murder case retrial, for the hearing for it, not an official retrial, just a hearing to see if there will be a retrial, has not been set yet. So that's still something that is out there. And state court officials have not yet chosen a replacement judge to preside over the matter after trial judge Clifton Newman recused himself because he served on the first trial and afterwards had made comments in the media about, how he felt Murdaugh was guilty and his team didn't feel he should be part of any future, whether it's hearings or full-on trials. because of that. And he did ultimately recuse himself. So a lot still out there, a lot to still work through on a case that, a lot of people felt like was done and over. There keeps being more and more and more changes and accusations, and it is a mess, which, we learned through this whole Murdoch process how much of a mess the legal system in that county and in many parts of the state. I mean, let's be real, everywhere in this country, how problematic and how disorganized and corrupt some of these things can be. And it just keeps more and more keeps spinning out from this whole Murdoch murders investigation, trial, sentencing, and everything else. We'll certainly be keeping an eye on it. That'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio, but I did want to let you know one of the new things that, along with my site upgrade to holycitycenter.com, there is something called Half Off Low Country. These are deals with local organizations. For instance, Islander 71 was one of the first ones to partner with this program that's being offered by myself, as well as my sibling sites, which I'll talk about more later. That are also here in the Charleston area. But in any event, you were able to purchase essentially a gift card, a $50 gift card for $25, or a $100 gift card for $50. That's where the half off comes from. And then you would be able to go to the restaurant, and you would have that gift card for the total, not that what you paid, but for what the actual worth was. And it did really well, despite me not mentioning it on the podcast, not really promoting it. It was kind of a soft launch of a new thing that we were trying out. And it went really, really well. Now there's some other businesses on there. I believe we have like a gym on there and a chiropractor on there offering this half off deal. So whatever you pay, double it is what you ultimately will get in return for services or food, depending on which organization you go with. So it's a great way if you've been wanting to try out something new in town and just weren't sure if you had the budget or whatever it may be. So go check that out, because we do have some great local businesses on there, and we're looking to add more. And the plan, of course, is when we do add more, I'll mention them on the podcast, so you all will be able to scoot on over to the website and pick up any deals, because some of these will have a limit on how many of these like vouchers, these gift cards that we can give out. So you'll keep it tuned here. Tune's not really real. This isn't actual radio, but you know what I mean. And as we add businesses, I'll be sure to pass that along, so you'll know what new deals we have. And if you have a business, know someone who does, whether it's your own boss or a friend or whatever, who may be interested in participating in this program, just let them know about it, direct them to the site, and you can send them to me, and I'll get to them with a member of my team who can help out with that. But it's something we think could be really good. Who doesn't like discounts and things? So go to holycitycenter.com and then just click on half off deals on that tab to see what we have available. With that said, I won't ask you for any of the normal favors and requests that I normally do. You already probably have them memorized by now if you even make it to the end of these episodes, so you know what the spiel is. But I do have to say thank you for listening, and I do have to say thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins of LMC Sound System, who produces each and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. And of course, a thank you to Tyler Boone, whose music you hear in each and every show as well. Have an amazing weekend. I look forward to speaking to you all again on Monday with the next episode. Until then, good night and good luck.